and mortars, and is a member of revision of Indian Standard Code IS 712/1984 in specification for building limes. He is on the editorial board of Journal of Facta Universities, Journal of Cement Wapno Benton, among others, and is a reviewer of several international journals published by Elsevier, Thomas Telford, Taylor and Francis, etc. He has worked
Ikram,
as associate.
Ikram, it's okay. Please. I mean, let's go to the job now. Is it okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. It's an honor to have you, sir. So let
you.
us hand over the session to you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go to
Thank
the
you, sir.
actual
Thank
business. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Rajesh and the
Sorry.
head of the department, Dr. Gopinath, Professor Mahesh, the principal of the SR University. I'm very happy that the college has now converted to university, and definitely it is taking great strides in that particular direction. So I'm also happy that I understand that you're starting a new course on MTech Construction Technology Management. So from that point of view, definitely the present FDP which you are trying to organize is going to have a very great what do you call impetus. Okay, with just few words, let me just go to my topic. I'll be talking about the performance and assessment of sustainable concrete making materials. Of course, the topic is like this, but when I talk, can I just ask everybody to put on mute, please, because there is some sort of disturbance. And Dr. Rajesh, the audio as well as video are clear. Dr. Rajesh.
Yes, sir. Everything is clear, sir.
Is my screen clear? Okay. The
Yes,
audio
sir.
is okay. The video is okay. Everything is fine. Okay. Fine.
Everything is okay.
Please keep everyone on mute, and I'll give chance for them to speak. No issue. But there is some disturbance coming, so please keep on mute.
Yeah. I request all the participants to mute yourself.
Fine. So let me just continue with this lecture. I mean, today, though I'm just calling it as performance and assessment of sustainable concrete making materials, in fact, I just want to bring about a sort of confluence as well as a juxtaposition between the three aspects, which are, the strength, sustainability, as well as durability. So that's what is the main focus of the of today's lecture, because the sustainable development is something like a ecological process basically, whereas durability is nothing but the resistance to various deteriorating agents. So, and strength is of course the one of the important parameters from the performance point of view. So when I say I want to bring about a confluence and juxtaposition between what I call the strength, the durability, and sustainability, I will try to slowly explain to you what I actually mean to say. Let's go to the next slide. Now, a little bit about the evolution of concrete. If you just see the evolution of structural concrete from 1800s to date, for example, you can see that as we are progressing from 1800 in 1850s, 1867s, for example, there is the advent of reinforced concrete, and then we have slowly moved to the 1920s, where the 1940s, for example, with the pre-stressed concrete and the other forms of reinforced concrete, and as well as other types of concretes have also come into picture, like your recycled aggregate concrete, and there are the advent of many different types of concrete suiting the requirements of the order of that particular day. And so we really talk about many different types of, we have been talking about many different types of concretes. Chief among them include your self-contracting concrete, material concrete, your lightweight, low dense, high dense, the different types of concretes which have come into place during these 1850s to 1990s, 1980s, 1985s, etc. In 1995, we suddenly felt a need to go for ultra high performance concrete because we want to reduce the size of the materials or the size of the members, for example. And then came a very important aspect close to 1950s to 1980s is that, people started thinking that there should be a shift from a strength-based design to some sort of a durability-based approach. And so that has actually started in 1950s, late 1950s. And then in 2000, for example, the new concept of sustainability has come into picture. Now, I don't say it's new because already we have passed something like 20 years or so. So, but the larger strides we have in fact made in the past few years where there has been a lot of impetus on the sustainability based approach. So what I'm going to talk about is simple a love story between your strength, durability, as well as sustainability. And then we will try to realize at the end of the lecture that, all the three are important. And I will also mainly focus on the basically the performance of various alternative materials. And then we also try to talk a little bit of durability. And then we also will say that, how sustainability becomes very important, and end with a beautiful conclusions. Okay. So all I want to say at this point in time is that, there is a very good paradigm shift from a strength-based design to durability-based design to a sustainability-based design, and all these three things are going to form something like different vertices of the three triangles. Like, the strength is important, the durability is important, the sustainability is important, but I don't say it's an equilateral triangle though. Okay, so let's just go further. Now, the definition of sustainability, as everybody starts with it, I just try to put in my point from the sustainability point of view. We know that, a very common definition of sustainability is the development that meets needs of the present generation and without compromising the ability of the future generations so that they can meet their own needs, for example. So this is something like, a very prominent and a very common definition, which is from the Brundtland report. So if you talk in a very common man's, language, it is something like जियो और जीने दो. आज के पीढ़ी भी जीना है और कल के पीढ़ी भी जीने लायक बनाना है. That is what is the meaning of sustainability. So I mean to say that we really cannot compromise on damaging the ecological health of our planet. So that is what is the essential meaning of sustainability and its definition. Now, let me just go to the world population development, because it's very important, because everything actually has a count on the world population development, because the infrastructure is going to depend on it. And the several challenges are going to be posed because of the increase in infrastructure. So that's why I thought it's worthwhile to talk about the world population development a little bit. Now you see that, we are around here somewhere about 7.88 billions or so. And then by the end of 2050, we are expecting an asymptotic growth, right from 1750s, as you can notice, from 1950 way towards 2050, for example, there's an asymptotic growth in the population. And we are expecting, that the population is going to be around 10 billions approximately. So, which is actually posing a serious problem. And on the right side, you can see one figure I'm trying to show with respect to the growth of population of China vis-a-vis India. Okay. And, at one point of time, there is on these curves, you can see there's an intersection. And then beyond a certain point, we are in fact defeating China in terms of population. We don't call it as population, we call it as human resource, of course. But at the same time, like we are surpassing China in terms of population immediately after 2025 or 2030, we are surpassing China in many terms. It's a neighboring country which is day in and day out, as you know, is posing serious challenges to India, and we are able to actually overcome these challenges. In fact, while surpassing China in terms of population, we are also going to grow our human resource to bring the country on the map of the world. So that's what we are trying to do, and that's what we will do. And what I mean to say at this point in time is increase in population and energy consumption has become a serious problem. Of course, though and as I said, it's also comes with serious challenges. Among them, water scarcity and the recent floods, for example, we have seen. So either there is a water scarcity or there is a floods. So both are actually challenges to us. And what are the reasons for that? Most of them are man-made reasons, as we are trying to see. So at this point in time, it's very important that we focus on the infrastructure development vis-a-vis sustainability, also taking into account the durability and strength point of view. So that's what I just wanted to say. Now, let me just put up one slide with respect to the global carbon footprint. I thought it's very important to understand where our country is vis-a-vis the other countries, like United States, for example, is occupying a very greater role. You can see China is occupying a greater role. But the good news at this point in time is that, India is occupying a big toe portion. it's not that, it's very less, it's not very high, but, at the same time, we have to also see that the carbon footprint is kept to a minimum. What is the meaning of carbon footprint? It is something like the amount of impact which the embodied energy, particularly with respect to the carbon dioxide and other types of dangerous chemicals, like the dangerous chemicals like nitrous oxide, etc., which we are trying to put on the earth. So I mean to say that the total emissions by each nation that I'm trying to put here, China and United States are occupying a greater role. Russia is over here. Your Japan is over here, and your India is there. And okay, not very big as compared to China, because we are developing countries like China, and we also require a huge amount of infrastructure like China. So that's why there is every chance that if we don't keep a check on that this particular big toe may grow into this particular portion. So that is why there should be a check on the global carbon footprint. Now, on the right side, I'm trying to show you the concept of an Earth overshoot day. I'm just not trying to project the 2020, because 2020 is there is a global pandemic in 2019-20. Still, we are actually in the same phase. So I don't really, I'm not really at this point in time. I'm not trying to put the 2020 figures here. I'll of course come to that particular point. But one should understand the meaning of Earth overshoot day. Earth overshoot day is basically the concept which says that the amount of resources which our Earth is producing in this particular year, and with respect to how much we are trying to consume. For example, if you see way back in 2000, for example, in 1999 or 2000, the amount of resources which we are producing produced by the Earth is consumed somewhere in October. Whereas if you go down, if you go up like 2005, 2007, 2017, and 2019 or so, we can see that our resources which we are producing for a particular year are consumed by the end of August only, which means something like it's actually not August also, something like July ending or so. That means whatever we are trying to consume after August 1st, where the amount of resources are exhausted for that particular year, is we are trying to eat away the resources from the next year. So, which means we are trying to draw the resources from the next year, which means the essential concept of the definition of sustainability, which we said that we try to actually leave something for the future generations to make their own needs, is not being realized. So that is what is the greatest difficulty, or that's what is the greatest point here. Down, you can see that I'm trying to show the Earth overshoot day for 2019, something similar to this. I'm showing the exact figure here. It is July 29, 2019. That means whatever we are consuming after July 30th is the resources which are belonging to 2020, not 2019, which means we are falling a deficit from August, September, October, November, December in 2019 resources we are trying to produce. So that means, and that is because that's because of the type of practice and the type of resources which are getting exhausted because of various reasons. Okay, so that's a point which has to be in our mind. Now, I'll also try to just say a little bit about the number of planets needed. For example, if everybody is using the resources like Qatar, you can notice here that if everybody starts using like how Qatar is using resources, we'll be requiring something like 9.3 times of Earth. Let me just go back once again and then show you one particular figure here. It is 1.7 to 1.75 times of Earth. That means we are consuming, if at all I have to try to meet the global demand in a particular year, I'm consuming 1.75 times of Earth. That's average value of the entire world. And if I try to put it that particular figure vis-a-vis the amount of resources which Qatar is spending, for example, if everybody tries to use like how Qatar is spending its resources in terms of the fossil fuels burning and all these things, because they make huge amount of oil, etc., you can see that 9.3 times of Earth is required. And if you see US, it's not a good news, 5 times of Earth. And the good news from the point of view of India is that we are at a 0.67 times. That means we are not crossing 1, but we are close to 1, 0.67. Okay, it's as far as the point now is concerned, it's fine. But it's very important that unless until we try to do a check on the global footprint or the carbon footprints which we are trying to create on the earth. It's the sliding biocapacity as well as the growing ecological impact cannot be controlled. So which means it's very important that we have to think about ways and means of reducing the embodied energy or the carbon footprint which we are trying to create with respect to all our practices, be it burning of fossil fuels, be it cement, be it air conditioners, be it all the different aspects. So which I just come to that a little later. Now let me just talk about the embodied energy. Embodied energy is something like the energy which is required to bring a particular product into the market. So be it anything like be it concrete here, as you can notice, be it steel or be it ceramics, it all depends upon how much energy you are expending to bring this particular product into the market. And you can see straight away that if I'm talking about concrete, for example, the embodied energy of concrete, is something like 220 gigajoules. That's a good number. And if you see steel, for example, it's 140 gigajoules. And if you see ceramics, for example, it's around 70 gigajoules. But if you see glass, for example, it's less than 50. But the point is, are we really ready to make an alternative to the concrete? Are we really ready to replace everything with, can we completely do away with concrete? Is a question which I'm trying to just bring forth. Yeah, the embodied energy seems to be slightly high, but is this embodied energy vis-a-vis when I try to calculate with respect to the same amount of usage for aluminium or for example, timber or anything like that, what will be its role? Let us try to bring forth a little bit later. Now, in addition to that, there is also an important aspect to talk about a concept which is called as cradle to cradle or cradle to grave, which is something like circular economy. That's a very important aspect today we talk about whenever we talk about the concept of sustainability. Now, one has to understand that, right from the point of view of materials manufacturing to materials transport to, for example, all other things like, involving all the basic aspects of carbon emissions of a typical building, if I try to consider right from the hot water to refrigeration to, for example, all other operational energies, and then reconstruction and then reuse. That's part of the circular economy. We can see that the embodied carbon is around 35%, whereas the operational carbon is around 65%. So there is something like a check which has to be put on the carbon dioxide input or the carbon dioxide input which we are trying to give to the Mother Earth. So which can definitely be brought about if we can have knowledge on the embodied energy of the different types of materials which can be used as alternatives to in concrete. So, but the bad story or the sad story is that we really don't have the embodied energy calculation of all the materials which we are using as a part replacement for cement. For example, we talk so much about supplementary cementitious materials like the fly ash or GGBS or anything like that, but there is very little research or very little amount of material which is available on how much amount of embodied energy each of these supplementary cementitious materials can really create on the can have an impact in the concrete. So which means that's one area actually which I'm trying to open up to the budding engineers or the young faculty, for example. Somebody can think about, if I can really calculate the embodied energy of various materials which I can use as a replacement for different types of materials I'm using in concrete, that's a very good area of research. In fact, very little amount of research is available in this particular area, and it's actually is going to change from the topography. So it's very important that we try to develop our own embodied energy calculation for the materials which are available in our country. So that's a very, very important aspect one has to keep in mind. So that's a gray area research for young budding engineers. Let me go further. Now, as far as the construction output is concerned, let me just project the Indian scenario. We are really very growing very fast, and our country will be the second largest country in the construction growth, I think, next to China, because of the large amount of population, the infrastructure growth is going to be there, and to tackle with the growing needs of this population, the infrastructure grows, and when infrastructure is going to grow, it also demands a requirement of material. So that's where is the point of juxtaposition which I'm talking about, or the confluence and juxtaposition which I'm talking about with respect to the use of materials vis-a-vis the strength, the durability, as well as the sustainability. Now you can see that if you see our National Planning Commission, I mean, we have allocated something like close to $1 trillion for the next 5 years for the growth of infrastructure development. There are several schemes which the government of India is coming up with with a very positive attitude. Like, you might have heard about schemes like some Amrut, Hriday, for example. We have Pradhan Mantri Gram Vikas Yojana, Awas Yojana, and there are several, the topic itself we are talking about is smart cities, heritage cities, for example. There are several other things like Swachh Bharat Mission, etc. These are all going to have a good impetus on the entire growth of the nation. And the entire growth of the nation is also dependent upon one of the important things I just pointed out is the growth of infrastructure, and the growth of infrastructure is going to pose several challenges to us. And we civil engineers are a part and parcel of the growth of this infrastructure, and that's why we are worried about what are the different ways and means of reducing the reducing the amount of carbon dioxide or reducing the toxic substances which we are trying to reduce to the Mother Earth, so that the carbon footprint can definitely be minimized. That's what is our idea. Now, let me just talk a little bit about cement production. Of course, you might have studied about the production of cement. Some students are there, some research scholars are there. I just want to very briefly try to talk about this particular aspect. See, when you talk about cradle to cradle or cradle to grave, for example, the production of cement is going to pass through several stages. We talk about argillaceous and calcareous materials. We talk about, pre-calcination, and then we talk about, the grinding and heating of these materials in the rotary kiln, and that passes through several temperature. For example, like 850 degrees centigrade, your B-light formation, 1300 to 1350 degrees centigrade, your A-light formation. Now, the point here is that when you try to make the raw material preparation, good amount of energy is going to get expended. You are doing the quarrying of the limestone, which is a very important aspect. And so when you try to compare the different raw material preparation and then going for the clinker production, as everybody knows, that in the rotary kiln, the materials, the argillaceous, calcareous materials, etc., are burnt to a good amount of temperature, and what basically comes out of that rotary kiln is what is called as a clinker. And then you quench, and then you try to take it to the ball mills, and then add certain performance additives along with the gypsum, and then you get the final finishing product. So, which means there are several stages which are involved. As you can notice here, the pink one which I'm trying to show you are the carbon dioxide output in terms of energy. And then, when you're trying to burn at 850 to 1300 degrees centigrade to get the requisite products like A-light as well as B-light, which are very, very important from the strength point of view. B-light is more important also from the durability point of view. You are trying to basically expend a good amount of energy. And then at the same time, it is also involving chemical process, and that chemical process is also releasing a good 50% of the embodied energy, or the emissions are quite high. So out of the 100% emissions, there is a contribution of 5 plus 40, 45 plus 5, 50% from the point of view of energy, be it fossil fuels, or I think there's an alternative way of actually burning. We can try to use other ways of waste wood, for example. We can try to use what are called as rubber tires, for example, to also burn, so that we can try to put a less amount of impetus on the what you call the fossil fuels, and we can try to use these alternate materials like waste wood, for example, or you can try to use, as I said, rubber tires, for example, for burning, so which can actually reduce the amount of energy, stress which we are trying to put on the fossil fuels. The other part is the chemical process. In this process, when we are trying to burn the calcium carbonate, obviously we are going to get a chemical carbon dioxide, as well as the CaO plus CO2 is going to come. The chemical carbon dioxide which we are going to get, can we really try to curtail on that? Because the chemical carbon dioxide is also being curtailed. For a certain amount I can try to do, but the chemical reaction, if it is really stopping, then the important products which we are talking about for the growth of, for the development of strength, etc., cannot be obtained. So that's where we can try to put a check on the energy demand by probably reducing the fossil fuels, which are to the order of 70%, and then we can try to think of a replacement of this 70% with other waste wood or rubber tires, etc., in the rotary for burning the materials, the rotary kiln, and probably we can try to get the get a good advantage. Yeah, let me just try to go to the next one. If you see the India's projected demand by 2047, as you can notice that there are the total energy demand, for example, by 2047 is a good 18,125 terawatt hours. Now, the point of interest for us is, the buildings are occupying a good 2,287 terawatt hours, which includes everything. Like, it includes commercial lighting or heating or, everything, residential heating, etc. It involves all these things. And a good amount of energy is basically expended in the building. So can we try to put a check on this by using sustainable materials and sustainable technologies is the point of discussion in several levels of platforms where the sustainability is being discussed. At the same time, let me also try to project the demand for the cement production. As you can see, the demand for the cement production, from something like 450 to 600 million tons, a lower level of 450 million tons to upper level of 600 million tons. By 2050, the demand for cement is actually growing to 750 to 1360. But the point is, as you can notice here, there is a huge increase in demand, and that's because of the increase in the growth of infrastructure, which should match the population requirement. So, and this particularly is not so much in the OECD countries probably, but the demand for the cement is more, I think, in case of our first China and then India. India is a developing country, so obviously we require a lot of requirement of the cement. So that's what is the point here. But the important point which I also want to say is, if you see the statistics which I was trying to present from the carbon footprint point of view, India is doing better. In fact, when compared to China as well as Japan, as I told you, that our carbon footprint vis-a-vis the amount of 1.75 times of Earth, if you try to compare, ours is 0.67 times. I mean, which means we are not really very low, but it's an alarm which should actually grow. But definitely we are better compared to the other developed countries. So that's what is a good news for us. Now the point here is, I said there is a growth of so much amount of demand of cement. Yeah, that is true, because the growth of infrastructure is very high. But the point is that can we really, you can see the use of cementitious materials, and you can see that the cementitious materials are going to make up a good 30 to 50% of everything we produce. And if as against the wood, for example, as against the ceramic, for example, they are occupying very low as compared to the amount of the materials production per year. But this is because cementitious materials are occupying a very good role. So can we really live away with this completely with the cementitious materials? Can we really construct everything with wood? Can we really make everything with ceramic or iron or anything like that? The answer to this is a big no, because it's not possible. Wood is not available everywhere, and the amount of wood, the material production of the wood as compared to the cementitious material is very low. But the important positive point which we have to notice from this point is that the carbon dioxide emission, even though we are trying to use the materials of the order of 30 to 50% of everything we produce, the carbon dioxide emission is only 5 to 10%. So which means, as against the amount of cementitious materials we are trying to use, the carbon dioxide emission is low, 5 to 10% only. So I don't think it's really a problem just from the use of cementitious material. There is also a concentration which has to be done for the production of the carbon dioxide from other sources, not just by cementitious materials. So the summary of this particular slide, what I'm trying to tell is, as against the requirement of our cementitious materials, the amount of carbon dioxide emissions is not very great. Okay. And let us try to come to the several challenges which the concrete industry is posing. Let us just try to summarize whatever we just tried to talk so far. I've already told you that the population is continuing to increase. At this point in time, our population is 7.8 billions, for example, around that value. And we are going to down to up to something like 10 billion tons in 2050. And our role is something like 17.74% of the total world population. So to match this population demand, the infrastructure needs are going to grow. So definitely there are many constructions which have, every time we cannot destroy and then we cannot go for a new construction because the capital expenditure is going to be huge. So I think there is also a very important aspect of concentrating on the aging and deteriorating infrastructure. Can we really go for repair and rehabilitation of these structures so that we can try to put a less amount of stress on the new construction, because the capital expenditure becomes very huge if I try to go for a new construction always. So that's the second challenge which we have. So the first challenge is basically the population. The second challenge is to match this population. First and second are interrelated. So the infrastructure needs should grow. When we say the growth in infrastructure, can we really think of opening a new area of repair and rehabilitation of the aging and deteriorating infrastructure is one thing should be in my mind. But whenever I'm talking about this particular point, mind you that the repair and rehabilitation should not be at the cost of, it should actually give the benefit of the repair and rehabilitation which we are trying to do. If I'm trying to do a repair of a structure which can last for only 2 or 3 years, it's not worthwhile. So that is where the engineers have to take a decision. The third thing is the third challenge to the concrete industry or we concrete technologists or we engineers who are working in this particular area is that the natural resources are becoming extinct. So the non-renewable energy is becoming scarce. So it's very important that we try to high time that we try to think about alternate ways of different materials. See, one thing I told you very clearly, that the cementitious materials are there to come. We cannot really think of an alternative to cementitious materials because they are produced cheaply, they are reduced, they are actually not giving that much amount of carbon dioxide vis-a-vis the other things. I will try to show one more comparison. And then but the point is that material natural resources are getting extinct. So one has to think about ways and means of producing concrete using other ways of other materials, like be it from the point of view of replacement of cement or fine aggregates or coarse aggregates. It's very important. So concrete has come to live with because it's a very beautiful, sustainable or material from the and also it's a versatile material. So we have to think about how best I can try to make the concrete using other materials. So that is what is the third challenge here. The fourth point is, can we really think of reducing this carbon dioxide also, because it's not about the amount of cement is increasing, the infrastructure growth is increasing. Probably when you try to compare with aluminium, I think the amount of involved energy in equivalent sense for concrete or cement is going to be very low. But the point is, it's also to be it's very important also to think about that we are trying to talk about the large amount of use of cement. So can we really think about the reducing this also to some extent? That's what is the summary I want to tell. And this also here, I just want to say that there are 4 or 5 points here. One is cement concrete is a widely used material. There's no doubt about that. There's no replacement for that. Manufacture of cement, can we really try to think about alternate ways of using anything like other than the fossil fuels, so that we can try to valorize these toxic elements. Also at the same time, we have to also think about the use of supplementary cementitious materials, because they have a very good affinity with cement and concrete. One has to really think about any supplementary materials, anything is available in the nature, you try to mix in concrete, and develop a new concrete is not the point here. It has to develop the requisite amount of strength. It should also, we have to concentrate on the durability. At the same time, one more important thing which is coming in my mind is the service life of the concrete. So can we really think of enhancement of the service life vis-a-vis the durability, and can we really create a good amount of sustainable type of material? So this is what is in my mind at this point when I try to talk about the previous slides. Now let me go further. One thing which I was trying to talk about in the summary is concrete environmentally friendly. I think I was trying to stress the same point earlier also, that I am trying to compare here. Can you see here this particular graph where I am trying to show the relative energy of carbon dioxide if I try to compare with respect to aluminium? You can see cement and concrete are very low. Concrete is a product, of course, which you are going to get, but cement is the main, what I call the chemistry part of this concrete is basically in cement. So if I'm trying to compare the relative energy of carbon dioxide which aluminum is producing with respect to the cement, it's very low. I think I'm very clear. Let me just try to take a pointer and then use here. So can you see here the amount of cement is here, whereas the amount of aluminum is this much. So where you can see that the amount of embodied energy which you are calculating in terms of millijoules with respect to concrete is very low, as compared to aluminum, which is quite high, which means is really the carbon dioxide emission from the concrete a major problem. So that is what is the positive impact from the environmental point of view. When we talk about sustainability, there are 4 different points. In fact, at one point of time, we used to talk about a triple bottom line approach, which is social, economic, as well as environmental. Now, we actually try to bring in another leg from our research as well as from our latest developments, that we try to talk about the technological aspect also as an important thing from this sense, from this point of view of valorization of the carbon dioxide. So can we really do something so that we can try to reduce the carbon dioxide footprint? So that is what I mean to say, that the environmental impact of concrete is that the embodied energy is low as compared to aluminum. I am trying to very clearly point out here. Concrete is here and aluminum is here, which obviously means that the embodied energy is actually low if I try to compare with aluminum. Now, but where is the point here? If this calculation is basically from the point of view of millijoules per kilo, that is fine for the weight point of view. But what we have to understand here is that, we are trying to produce huge amount of cement, which is the requirement has increased. The population has increased by 3/4 from 1950 to till date. And then the amount of cement requirement has increased by 34 times, so which is very huge. And this requirement of of cement is more in case of China as well as India, because they are growing countries. Whereas you can see there is almost a constant growth in case of OECD countries. So, which means the large amount of cement requirement is basically taking place in cement as well as India. That's why you can find many types of cement manufacturing units in India as well as in China, because our requirement for cement is much more when compared to many other countries, because ours is a growing country and our population and our infrastructure growth is very high. Now, let me just try to go to this particular figure. As you can notice that, can we really, we are actually thinking about reducing, or we are trying to not increasing by more than 2 degrees warmth in temperature from the point of view of what I call the global warming. And if I really have to do that, as usual, if you try to go with, we are following a red line. And if you really want to keep a check on the global warming by keeping it as low as 2 degrees centigrade, we have to definitely think about reducing the carbon dioxide emissions. Otherwise, I'm afraid that by 2050, we are trying to increase the carbon dioxide emissions by as high as 30%, whereas today we are at something like 5 to 10%, as I just try to project to you. So that is what is actually bringing me to the environmental impact from the negative point of view, is that increased cement production is what is actually required. So though the amount of what I call the embodied energy seems to be low as compared to aluminum, because our demand for cement is increasing, we really have to keep a check on ways and means of reducing the carbon dioxide by thinking of alternate materials to cement. Can we really think of supplementary cementitious materials or something like that, so that we can try to keep a check on the amount of carbon dioxide which is developed because of the production of cement? Now, is there any alternative for that? As I already told you that there's no alternative, because cement basically requires the various oxides in the form of calcium oxide, silicon dioxide, and alumina. And can we really think of other materials? The answer to that is also that if we try to go for the Earth's crust and we try to compare the composition of the cement with respect to the Earth's crust is basically having the elements, particularly 8 elements are going to dominate. As you can see, oxygen, silica, alumina, ferrous, calcium, sodium, potassium, magnesium. All this is basically contributing to something like 98%, whereas the rest, like sulfur and all other things, are contributing to only 2%, which obviously means that the type of elements which are available in the Earth's crust, and be it its crust, or even if somebody is interested in understanding what is the elements in other planets, you can see by and large, all these planets, including the Earth's crust, is comprising of elements which are dominated by these 8 elements. Something like 98% are dominated by these elements. But out of these 8 elements, when you try to vis-a-vis compare the amount of elements which are possible to be used in Portland cement, for example, you can see sodium oxide and calcium or potassium oxide, they are too soluble, so they directly dissolve, and then they really cannot precipitate, and then they cannot make a very good amount of what you call the binding material sort of a thing. And when you talk about, for example, the ferrous oxide as well as magnesium oxide, once again, they are too immobile. That means they actually don't properly combine and mix, and they just stay like ground mass at a particular point. That is what they can understand by seeing the scanning electron microscope images also. Now, what is left with us are the three elements, which are calcium oxide, silicon dioxide, as well as aluminum oxide, which we remember are called as calcareous and argillaceous materials. And then they are the most useful because they are useful to form the so-called what you call the Bogues compounds, which are tricalcium silicate, dicalcium silicate, tetracalcium aluminum ferrite, as well as tricalcium aluminate. So what I want to bring out at this point in time is that, are there any alternatives to produce the cement? The answer is no, because the Earth's crust is basically comprising of these elements, which are occupying 98%. Out of these elements, if I try to make the oxides, the possibility is only that, out of all these sodium oxide, potassium oxide, ferrous oxide, magnesium oxide, some are not possible because either they are too soluble in the alkaline material, making alkaline material not really making a precipitate for a good binding medium. Or the other thing is that, things like calcium oxide, silicon dioxide, and alumina is the only point, because ferrous oxide and magnesium oxide is basically, they are not mobile. They stay at one point. If you see the passage of time, if you try to compare, seeing the scanning electron microscope, this is actually existing like a ground mass at a particular point. So that's why, that is the reason why we have no alternative from the Earth's crust, whatever is available for the composition of cement vis-a-vis, these are the only three materials which are available today. And that is actually occupying, and from that you can see calcium oxide is occupying 60 to 67%, calcium or silicon dioxide is something like 70 to 25%, and alumina is occupying 3 to 8%. That is the same three materials what I'm showing here. So that actually forms the major phases, that is the tricalcium silicate, which is about 60%, which is also called as alite, and the dicalcium, which is mainly responsible for the strength in the concrete. The dicalcium silicate, which is called as belite, which is responsible for the strength in the concrete, but also good from the durability point of view. The third one is called as cellite, which is actually tricalcium aluminate. And then the fourth one is called as tetracalcium aluminum ferrite. So this tetracalcium aluminum ferrite, as well as tricalcium aluminate, is basically very important for the initial heat burst. As you can notice, that sometimes we get something like a very quick setting or false setting, and this is very important, particularly in case of materials like where you are trying to go for geopolymer concrete, where you might have noticed that the setting is going to be very fast in case of geopolymer concrete. So what I want to say at this point in time is, Bogue has actually given some equations, and I'm not interested to give those equations because they are not really useful at this stage, because when Bogue has given the equations at that point, the supplementary cementitious materials are not there. He was just trying to talk about only the simple cement making materials only. So that's why it's not really having a relevance at this point. So we can try to think about, investigating it from the the microstructure analysis, and then try to check what is an active material and what is basically important for binding, etc. Now the gypsum is there, which is actually in very small quantities, as I was trying to point out. And then the advantage we are also going to get by probably thinking about adding certain calcium carbonate, probably as a performance additive. We can think of ways and means of increasing this performance additive from 5% to something like 10% or so, so that the calcium carbonate, when I'm trying to use it at the grinding level, I'm not going to use it, heat it. So obviously the carbon dioxide emission is not going to be there. So that sort of valorization can definitely be useful. This is a typical hydration curve. I think I can try to skip it. There are different stages. I think you people, all of you know it. There is an initial heat burst at this point, and then the good part is that the hydration process is actually going to give you certain amount of dormant period, which we normally call it as important from the point of transportation and placing the concrete, which is called as the initial setting time. And then once again there is a accelerating stage, which is the third stage, and this is basically the point where it ceases from the initial setting time. The fresh properties are going to cease basically, so the workability is going to decrease, and then we go to a slightly hardening stage, and then we come to the final stage, which is called as the steady stage, where it's no longer workable and it becomes very hard. That is called as the final setting time. You can notice here that the initial heat burst here is basically because of the large amount of tricalcium aluminate which is going to form. This is a very active reaction which is going to take place when cement is going to come in combination with water. The first and the foremost reaction which is going to take place and which develops huge amount of heat evolution from all the cement phases point of view is this tricalcium aluminate. You can see it's a good 867, and that is what is called as the reason for the initial heat burst here. Okay, and then of course the next is tricalcium silicate, and the next is tetracalcium aluminate ferrate, and the next is dicalcium silicate. Tetracalcium aluminate ferrate basically is responsible for your grayness in the cement. That's what is the reason. The hydration of the cement, if you just want me to just put very quickly, the tricalcium silicate and the dicalcium silicate, they are going to produce CSH gel, as you know, and also the portlandate, which is nothing but the calcium hydroxide. And this is basically responsible for the strength, and this is more responsible for the durability point of view, because the belite type of cements, that dicalcium silicates are basically, which are called as belite cements. Of course, we are trying to do a lot of research from the belite cements. But the point here is, are we really able to get a good advantage from the carbon dioxide point of view is a question which we try to actually point out. The other thing is the combination of tricalcium aluminate with water producing your AFT as well as AFM phases. AFT phase is nothing but ettringite, which you can identify for the needle-like crystals, and then that's going to take some time and then convert from the ettringite part to the monosulfates part. But this ettringite is also going to create some durability related problems, and that we have to actually concentrate upon. So probably once the ettringite is going to convert into monosulfates, I think it's more better, I mean more safe. But while ettringite, because ettringite, which are the needle-like crystals, they actually tend to grow in size and they break the interfacial transition zone between the what you call the CSH, the cement phase portion, and then it creates cracks, and then it creates very large durability problems. We'll try to see that. Now, for those of you who are interested in actually seeing the micrographs, probably there are, this is how basically we can try to see the various, the phases which we are going to get. There's an halide phase, which is nothing but the tricalcium silicate, usually identified as a rectangular or something like, something like a hexagonal, what do you call the trapezium shape or something like that. We have belite, which is the C2S, and that is basically rounded in shape. These are all the belite phases. People are interested in understanding how to see what looks like what. And there are interfacial transition zone, which is a ground mass area where you can have the space between the aggregate, between the belite as well as the halide phases, which is the tricalcium aluminate and the tetracalcium aluminate ferrite. This is not the aggregate space. These are, I'm talking about the microstructure. I'm really talking about the phases, that is halide, belite as well as C-lite or phases I'm talking about. So the ground mass can be identified between these areas, as you can notice here. These are the halide phases, and the round ones are basically the belite phases. And if you see the scanning electron microscope, with some magnification something like 2 micron, or this one is around 10 micron or so, you can see there are certain precipitates, you can see certain needle-like crystals here, you can see certain rods type of things. Now these are something like ettringites, these are gel-like creatures, or gel-like elements, which are something like, probably they are something like CSH gel, which are in the totally hydrated or slightly unhydrated, or there can be portlandate phases, which are identified by these rod-like phases. Okay, yeah, I think this is the same thing you can notice here. For example, the CH or the gel, which is a CSH, or the needle, which is ettringite, and this ettringite here, these are certain CH as well as this is a CSH. So that's what you can notice here. If you actually try to understand also the interfacial transitions or the different phases, as you can notice, that if you want to really see the texture, what is important is you try to go for the the atomic force microscopy is very important to understand the texture and the type of CSH. For example, if you want to go for the nano level, if you want to see, you can get the details about the hydration products, etc., which you are noticing. If you try to go for micro stage, micro level, looking at the micro level stages, you can try to understand the motor phase or the phase or the aggregate phase. If you go to meso level, for example, what you do is basically you try to take the cubes and then try to understand the concrete. And if you want to really check the performance of the entire material, we try to go for what is called as a macro level. So that's what is testing the elements in the form of beams or columns or something like that. So that means at every stage you can try to see the see and understand the different phases of concrete. So if you really want to understand a good texture or the CSHL, try to go to the atomic force microscopy, or even when I talked about the microscopic examination, you can try to get the motor phases or phase or aggregate phases, because they are of different sizes, as you can notice here. Okay. Now, once again, I'll put a break at this point, and I will say that what we have really identified is we have tried to identify the juxtaposition which we are going to have from the strength and to some extent the deterioration point of view. And then it's very important to identify that it looks to me like there is a need to find out an alternative materials for the cement, and what are the different materials I can think about. And that should be cost effective, that should be environmentally friendly, that should be durable, and that should be sustainable. And then I have to also think about, can I use any different types of industrial waste materials is one question which I have to think about. And then what are the different advantages I'm going to get from the point of view of impermeability, so that if the porosity is going to be less, and if I'm trying to make a very dense type of concrete, the ingress of the harmful chemicals will not take place. If the ingress of harmful chemicals like carbonation or carbon dioxide or oxygen, water, for example, or chloride ingress or sulfate attack, or is going to take place, and that is going to have a check on the or a very bad impact on the from the durability point of view. So I have to think about all these things when I really start trying to select a material. Okay, that is what is in my mind. Now, very quickly, I will try to pass through the supplementary cementitious materials which are greatly available. I think there is limestone, there is fly ash, there is slag. I'll try to talk about very briefly, very quickly about each of them. When you talk about limestone, let me just go to that point. Limestone is basically from the quarry, and as I already told you, this is the basic raw material which is important for the production of the cement. Yeah, someone wants to ask some question. Hello. 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 Rajesh?
No, sir. No one raised the question, sir.
Okay. Now, if there are any questions, you can please ask me. Okay. Yeah, okay. So let me go to this point. Yeah, you can mute it, please. You can mute it. So when you talk about, yeah. Yes. Okay.
So I request all the participants, better we can mute that. We can have an interaction sections at the end of this lecture.
No, even if you want me to wait for a minute or so, very quick, 1 or 2 questions, please, from the participants. 1 or 2 questions.
Sanjivani, I think you raised that. You opened the mic, and if you want, you can raise the question.
Yes, please. Yes, Sanjeevan. Do you have any question to ask?
I think it's a mistakes. I think again she's not. Okay, so we can continue, sir.
We can continue. Okay. So I just want to. Yeah. Yes. Yes. No. Nothing. Can I continue, or is there any question? Okay, right. So when you talk about limestone, I said that the calcium carbonate is basically the limestone is basically a very important the raw material which is for the cement. So what is happening is when I'm trying to grind this as well as pass it through the rotary kiln, for example, we are trying to subject the argillaceous and calcareous materials to very high temperature. So now the point here is, from the point of view of supplementary cementitious materials, can I really use this? Can I really valorize, because a huge amount of carbon dioxide is going to produce when I try to burn it in the rotary kiln. So is it possible to increase this 5% which we are trying to use as a performance additive while grinding after the clinker is formed? When we are trying to add the gypsum and the limestone, can we really think of using instead of 5%, can we try to increase is the point here? So can we go up to 10% or so? And can we really think about not only cement grade limestone, can we think about medium grade as well as slightly lower grade limestone also as a performance additive, so that on one hand we can try to use the lower grade as well as the medium grade limestone which is going as a waste. At the same time, I can try to valorize, because I can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide which is otherwise produced in huge amounts when I try to burn the same thing in the rotary kiln. So that is what is one point of research which is actually going on. That's what I mean to say is limestone. And when you talk about fly ash, for example, yes, there is a good amount of research which is going on in fly ash, but mind you, one has to be very important that you cannot really go for high volume fly ash, particularly when I'm trying to talk about people of the using of the order of 60%, 70% like that. It's also having a very dangerous point. If the calcium oxide is more, it's also going to produce calcium carbonate, which can actually reduce the what you call the alkalinity in the concrete, can improve the acidity, thereby the pH of the value when it is decreasing to less than 8 or so. Obviously, when the acidity increases, it becomes the alkaline passive layer which is going to be there on the steel is going to get broken. It becomes active for corrosion. So that's what is one point. Of course, there are very good advantages of fly ash, and there is also an abundant amount of fly ash which is available as compared to the slag I'm talking about, not as compared to limestone. Now, it's good to use up to 10 to 15% because it's a one good thing is that it is the proportion of workability is going to be high, but the durability is also going to increase because it can also go as an infill. It can go as an infill, so it can actually close the pores. So it can definitely serve the purpose of improving the durability point of view. But the point here is the reaction is going to be slow because it's having lower amount of amorphous proportions. So that's the reason why we get a late gain in strength. So in fact, more crystalline means that means it is less reactive. So it's less amorphous. In fact, lower proportion of amorphous material is available. So I think my recommendation is go for 10, 15%, 20%. At the maximum, you can try to go for 30% in case of fly ash. Though it's a good material, it's an essential material even in case of geopolymer concrete where you are trying to combine this fly ash as well as slag. But I think that because it is having lower proportion of amorphous material, and also it can also pose some durability problems. An order of 60-70% of fly ash is really a warning which I have to give. The third material which I'm talking about is slag, for example. Okay, so slag is actually that is also very good. It comes from the blast furnace slag. In fact, it is produced in 3 different stages. In fact, the air-cooled slag and the expanded slag are the 2 things which can be used to develop low or lightweight aggregate, as well as it can go used as an aggregate. But what is important from the point of view of supplementary cementitious material is a granulated or the ground granulated blast furnace slag, which we call it, and that is actually good from the point of view because it is having a very good amorphous nature. It's 90 to 100% amorphous, which means it's a glassy particle. It's highly amorphous, and that is the reason why the reaction is going to be very fast. In some cases, you can as well replace cement with good amount of slag because it's going to produce take an equal amount of role as that of cement. So that's why 35 to 50% replacement can be done. But there is even sometimes you can try to go for even 70-80% also, but depends on the type of slag. But the bad news is that the amount of slag available is actually very less in the world. So that's one point. Though it is having very good properties. The other point is, the other thing which I'm also talking about is the natural pozzolan. Natural pozzolans are available in plenty form. People are using, including vegetable ash like rice husk, etc. A lot of things are available. And the other thing is calcined clay. This is an LC3 cement which we are talking about, limestone calcined clay cement. So plenty amount of calcined clay is available. I think this is one area of research people can take, and then we can try to really get a good amount of valorization if I try to use this, because plenty amount of this is available. So if you try to, the one point which I was trying to talk about is the advantage or disadvantage when I'm trying to go for B-light type of cements. The amount of carbon dioxide, chemical carbon dioxide emission, if you try to compare these two, this is 512 against A-light, if you want to replace, is only 579. That means I'm not really getting a very good amount of benefit from the point of view of using B-light cements as compared to A-light cements. So that is why the B-light cements, though it can be used, but I feel that because you're not really getting a good advantage from the point of view of reduction in the carbon dioxide, it's not really probably that much useful from the point of view of sustainability. So that is what. But on the other hand, we have periclase here. We have the other things like, for example, yeelanite is there. This is what I was talking about. If you have a triangle like this, where you can try to put silica here, calcium here, as well as alumina here, what we are concentrating is on this particular area. But somebody can concentrate on this particular area also, where you can think of a material like yeelamite, where you can get calcium, alumina, as well as sulfur. As you can notice here, this is $, is sulfur, not sulfur silicate. So you can probably avoid silicate and reduce the amount of this calcium silicate by going towards this particular end of the triangle, making use of calcium as well as alumina and certain amount of sulfur, and stay on this particular side. The advantage is that definitely you are going to get the reduction in the carbon dioxide, because you are not really using a large amount of the reaction of calcium oxide plus silicon dioxide. But the point is, the type of alumina which you have to use should be rich in bauxite. So bauxite is very costly, and it is a very rare material which is available, and that is the reason why more amount of concentration is on these two rather than going on this particular side of the triangle. The other thing is periclase, magnesium oxide. As I already told you, the amount of magnesium carbonate which you are going to get from this is more dangerous as compared to the calcium carbonate which you are going to get. So that's why probably magnesium silicate can be a good alternative. But magnesium silicate, again, the availability and the benefit which we are going to get from magnesium silicate is less, very, very less as compared to the danger which your calcium silicate is going to produce. So that's why the alternatives are not much to us, except to go for yeelite as well as belite type of cements. And also, if you try to see the various distribution of these materials, as you can notice here, over a period of time from 1990s to 2015, so almost it has become stable. You can see that the orange is nothing but the limestone, slag is nothing but 5%, and you can see the yellow one, which is something like fly ash, and the pozzolanas is around 2%. That means at the maximum we are able to use something like, at the maximum is around 20%. And out of these, as you can notice, a large amount of material is available is in the form of limestone, as you can notice from this particular slide. And you just go to this slide. We talked about this. Yeah, this slide. As you can notice, the amount of slag which is available is very less, about 8%. We require greater amount of fly ash, slag, but the amount of slag available is less. We require to use lesser amount of fly ash, because these days we are talking about very high or quick setting, or concrete which has to give the results in a very less time, but the amount of fly ash available is more. But the use of this fly ash should be reduced in the sense there should be a check on that, otherwise there is going to be a problem. Slag can be used in more number, but the bad news is that there is only 8% available across the world, and that is the reason why we have to think about binary, ternary, tertiary, supplement. The alternate different types of combinations of these materials. That is how the concept of alternate materials or combination of materials has come. Silica fume is one thing which is also available. It is having very good properties, but the amount of silica fume is also very less. As I told you, it's having a very good properties from this point of view. It can enhance very, very high compressive strength, and you can with a 8% replacement or 8% addition in cement, you can get of the strength of the order of 100 MPa, 80 MPa, 100 MPa also. But again, this is coming basically from the ferrosilicon alloys. The amount is very, very less available. So that is also one point which you have to think about. So to sum up this particular point, I just want to say the availability of the supplementary cementitious point of view, what is available is the used and available. If I try to put it as a red as well as blue, as you can see, if you take fly ash point of view, this much is available and this much is already being used. But if you see from the slag point of view, this much is already used. The blue one is already used, but only this much is available. So that is the reason why I don't want to really talk about the success story or the failure story of geopolymer concrete, but definitely I think a good amount of slag should go into the formation of geopolymer concretes. But as you can notice here, the amount of slag available has become less, because it can actually produce basically a good type of a material. But the point is that it's actually coming to be less. So that's why today we are trying to combine slag and fly ash, or people are even trying to use fly ash plus other forms like rhysus ash, which is nothing but the vegetable ash here. Or people are trying to use a combination with waste glass as well as metakaolin also, which is something like the clay type. Now, what is available in good number as compared to the Portland cement here is the filler, which is nothing but a calcium carbonate, and then also this particular thing, which is a calcium clay. So that is the reason why there is a lot of research going in the area of limestone calcium clay cements, which you can notice. For example, if I try to typically compare the Portland cement with respect to the limestone calcium clay of 50% or 65%, you can see a good amount of strength gain has occurred as compared to the Portland cement. Where is the Portland cement? These are Portland cement, and you can see within 28 days, okay, by using a 50% replacement of the clinker with your with clay as well as calcium clay as well as the other clinker, you are able to with the other material, you are able to get a good advantage, and it is already surpassing the amount of strength which you are getting in case of Portland cement, which means definitely the research on limestone calcium clay can still be continued, and it is also having a better chloride capacity or chloride resistance. It is also having very good alkali silicate reaction. So what I mean to say at this point is 50% of the clinker can be substituted with these limestone. Limestone can be substituted with calcium clay to get an equal benefit, or in fact a better benefit from the Portland cement. So that's a good alternative we can think about. Now let me just try to talk something about another 15 minutes time is left for me, or a little bit more. I'll go for 5 minutes more maybe. I think I will try to put a break at this point and then just try to summarize. I think we started our discussion right from the point of view of definition of sustainability, and then very slowly we try to go for, is there any alternative to cement? Why the requirement of Portland cement is there? Why only Portland cement? I said the Portland cement or the cement concrete cannot be substituted because the concrete is a versatile material, and then this is very, very important, and it's actually producing for 30 to 50% of the cementitious material, the amount of what you call the carbon dioxide it is producing. We saw it is about 3 to 5% only. So that's why there cannot be an alternative for concrete directly, because in the same amount, if I want to use wood or steel or aluminum, the embodied energy is going to be huge, is one point. The second thing is the scarcity of this material. So we have come to a very, very good conclusion that cement concrete is no material which can be replaced. It's a versatile material. And then the only thing what we try to think about is, because the usage is increasing because of the increase in population and the what we call the infrastructure, we have to think of ways and means of an alternative to this cement. Hence, we talked about sustainable materials, or supplementary cementitious materials. The second point which I want to also talk about is, we have to also think about from the durability point of view. So if you want to think about the durability point of view, we have to think about selecting a material which can basically try to act as a very good filler, which can increase the density, decrease the porosity, and then break the interconnected porosity, which is a very important thing, because porous parts here and there is not really dangerous, but interconnected porosity is going to be more dangerous. So the interconnected porosity can be avoided by going for a denser concrete around these aggregates, for example, and we can concentrate on the interfacial transition zone. We can try to, basically increase the density, and we can try to reduce the water cement ratio, and to suit the workability, these supplementary cementitious materials are going to help me. Now, the third point of view, which I also want to say is, why Portland cement only? I think I told you, and why only these particular materials like calcium oxide, aluminum oxide, as well as silicon dioxide? I think I try to compare that with respect to the materials or the elements which are available in the Earth's crust. We don't have any alternative. And the other two things like the ferrous or alumina or magnesium, etc., they are really not very useful. Either the alkalis are there which are growing, which are basically too soluble, sodium oxide, for example, calcium, the potassium oxide, or for example, the ground mass is there, which is basically immobile. So what is important is, we are left with calcium, the elements like calcium, silicate, as well as alumina. So this combination can be done. The combination can be a calcium plus silica, which is actually going to give you your aelite as well as belites. Or you can also think about your calcium as well as alumina, which is going to give you yellowites, or which can actually think of which is nothing but your calcium, alumina, and silica. If we try to compare, we do get AFM as well as AFT as well as AFM phases. So it's very important that you try to select a material so that there is a juxtaposition of the durability on the sustainability, and there is a confluence of the of all these three, that is strength, durability, as well as sustainability. Now, little bit of sustainability, and then slowly I'll try to go for another 10 or 15 minutes of how to basically assess the sustainability and what is the little bit of, I mean, very slight. Quickly, I'll try to cover the amount of research, little bit of research also we did. Now, I said there is a paradigm shift in the sustainable construction. I said that a triple bottom line approach of environment, economy, as well as, 1 second, please, let me just, the environment, economy, as well as, you're able to see the pointer. I'm not very sure, 1 second. I just try to go to this one. Yeah, you can see here the environment, economy, as well as society, social aspect, which is nothing but a triangle. But this was earlier used to be called as a triple bottom line approach. Now we go for a quadruple bottom line approach because you know that the stability is, however, going to be there for a three sides are required for the stability, but a fourth side is required from the point of view of redundancy. So what we thought is, in addition to the environmental aspect, social, economical aspect, as well as social aspect, it is also imperative that you start also thinking about from the point of view of your technological aspect, and that is where the concept of reduce, reuse, recycle, all the 6 R's are going to come. And then if you want to go, you try to think about what is called as the concept of circular economy, right from the cradle to grave or cradle to grave to the cradle once again. So that is where there should be an impetus on the technological aspect, which includes the performance vis-a-vis the strength as well as the durability point of view. So we thought that it's important to actually have a fourth leg also. So from that point of view, if you go to the quadruple bottom line approach, let me just talk about what are the positive as well as the negative impacts of each of these 4 different indicators, which are environmental impact. As we have already seen, the positive impact is that, you know, it is going to, we can think about lowering the embodied energy. But on the other hand, lower embodied energy, because I try to compare with aluminum with respect to the concrete and cement. I said that the embodied energy with equivalent aluminum, if I try to compare, with respect to the requirement of the cement, for example, we have a positive aspect as well as a negative aspect. The positive aspect is, as compared to things like metals like aluminum, definitely cement and concrete is having a lower embodied energy. But as compared to, let me take a color, different color, please. I'll take this one. And as compared to the positive, negative impact, because it's not just only the lower embodied energy, because we have to talk in terms of tons and millions and tons of cement which we have used. So increased cement production is also going to have a negative impact on environment. The positive impact is, in its unison, if we try to compare, as compared to other materials, it is going to have a lower embodied energy. Now, economical impact is, the cement and concrete are the bread and butter for any infrastructure, which means to say they are the basic material which is required. So that's why it is actually going to have a good impetus on the increased livelihood in population. But the negative impact is poor construction and high repair costs is also going to have a negative impact from the, here it is not environmental, this is economical. Now, a social impact, when you try to come about, it is actually going to produce an affordable investment, because concrete is going to be cheaper when compared to any other material when you try to compare. But the negative impact is, once again, is that we are trying to cause what are called as concrete jungles, but which is becoming inevitable because of the increase in the growth of infrastructure to match the needs of the population. Now, technological impact, when I'm trying to add, I mean to say, the Ministry of Environment and Forests or the Pollution Control Board, these days they are saying anywhere the construction is going on, 20% should be replaced with recycled aggregate or construction demolish waste. So that means your reduce, recycle, and reuse is actually a positive impact from that technological point of view. But the negative point is the implementation issues are going to be there. Who is using this much amount of the recycled or construction demolition waste? Now, to this extent, what I try to do is, these 4 indicators, that is environmental, economical, technological, as well as social, we try to work out what are the different criteria which we can think about. The criteria which are common with respect to environmental, economical, technological, as well as social are being brought about. In fact, there is a huge survey which is done. I will try to tell you show the what I call the framework. I think I'll go to that one and then try to explain to you. Let me just go to the framework first. Yeah. So this is the framework which we try to. Yeah. I'll come to that. Yeah. Here, as you can notice that from the there are in fact 3 things which I want to talk about. These are called as the indicators. These are called as a criteria. And under each indicator, we have certain attributes. So this being the point, we try to weigh the attributes with respect to indicators and indicators with respect to the criteria with respect to the indicators. So that's what I will try to show you. Now these are the indicators here on the horizontal line, and these are the criteria on the vertical line. So we have tried to identify the different indicators after the different criteria here, as you are noticing, the climate change, the pollution and emissions, etc., cost, recyclability, etc., taking into account all these different indicators, which are environmental, economical, social, and technological, and then we try to see what is the weightage of each of them with respect to these indicators. That means the weightage of these criteria with respect to the indicators has been done, and then that is not only being done from the qualitative point of view by taking surveys of hundreds of people who belong to the different fields, like the contractors, the engineers, the common users, the R&D industry, the R&D industries, or the different people, and then we try to calculate the relative importance index and come to, out of those 50 criteria, we try to bring down to them to only 10 different criteria, and then try to weigh them with respect to these indicators. And that weighing we have done from the qualitative point of view, which is from the survey point of view, and quantitative point of view, which is from the laboratory test point of view. So this is where I'm trying to say that the technological indicators from the point of view of strength and as well as durability, as you can notice here, they are going to be added up to the social, economic, and environmental criteria, thus bringing in the quadruple bottom line approach for the sustainability. So I'll just try to skip this. So this is what we try to do, as I told you, that the factors and indicators are considered the material life cycle thinking, and we try to develop a sustainable material performance score. I'll try to explain that. Basically, the main idea is to develop a building assessment tool. The tools like Briha, for example, Bream, for example, LEED, for example, that sort of a rating. Can we really think of developing a sort of tool and then a rating system using all these different indicators, which I just tried to point out, using these criteria, which I tried to point out, using these attributes, which I was just trying to point out. So the indicators are further paired by using different methods like architectural hierarchy process or FTOPSIS, etc. And then the criteria are being weighed with respect to these indicators. And each of these criteria, they are having certain attributes. So we try to weigh these attributes with respect to the criteria and correlate these criteria with respect to the indicators, and then develop what is called as a sustainable building assessment tool. I'll try to tell you how we did. So I think I tried to divide this into different portions here. First of all, the qualitative part is there and the quantitative part is there, as I told you. So as far as indicators are concerned, we try to check whether we can really identify the suitable criteria and the relative performance indicators by using a Delphi technique. And then we actually try to go for a Cronbach's alpha to check the weigh the parameters of the criteria with respect to the indicators. When I say criteria, I mean to talk about these criteria, which are water efficiency, materials and waste management, etc. And when I say indicators, I'm talking about social, environmental, economical, as well as technology. All right. So let me just go to here. So once we do that, we get an interrelationship between the indicators as well as the criteria. And once we get that, we try to do because there are several objective and subjective functions, and there are several conflicting criteria as far as the judgment of these indicators as well as the criteria is concerned. A fuzzy TOPSIS method has been used, and then to actually select an appropriate material. In fact, what we did is we tried to work this on different types of materials, like the geopolymer, the slag-based cements, the fly ash-based cements, for example, the composite cements, and compared with the Portland cement. So then we try to do the assessment as to which can be the better alternative. That is what is the point of what I call the performance and justification, which I was trying to tell about. And then finally, we try to get the score for each of them: environment, social, economic, as well as technology, and then we try to club them and then get one sort of a score. That we call it as material sustainable performance score. I'll try to show you that also. I think this is the index. I think I can skip it here. I just want to say that in addition to relating the indicators as well as criteria, it is also important that we try to go through the where we try to also go through, one second, please. Let me just go to here. Yeah, it's also important that we try to go to the these three phases, which are nothing but your pre-construction, during construction, and post-construction phases, which I was talking in the initial point as something like life cycle phases, cradle to grave. So pre-construction to post-construction. So then once again comes to the pre-construction part by undergoing the 6 R's, which are nothing but the technological aspects. So by including these 3, I'm really talking about selecting a material, passing to the different phases with respect to the different attributes, combining with different criteria, and then satisfying the different indicators like social, economical, environment, as well as technological. And then finally, I could come out with some sort of an index. So this is what we developed, and this is what is available. Bream from UK, LEED is there. You have Griha from India, and you can see these different criteria are being judged with respect to they have a different type of role. There are some materials or there are some criteria which are not really being properly weighed in Griha as well as LEED. We try to have a systematic approach we have done and then develop this sustainable building assessment tool. I'll try to also show you. So these are the different criteria. This is a summation of that to get the sustainable score. And then finally, just like, Griha is having different numbers like 50 or 60 or 75 or 100 like that, we also try to develop the performance levels based on the building performance score which we got, and then rated them as first 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, as well as 5 star. Greater than or equal to 90 is 5 star. How do we get this particular point? Let me go to that. This particular tool is having different, can you see here, water efficiency, material and waste management. These are nothing but the criteria. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 criteria. And these are the different attributes under each of these criteria. So we try to do a household survey and then try to take the survey from that, and then using the various methods like, the Cronbach, sulfur, etc. We try to check what is the justification of this survey which we are getting, and then we try to classify the weightage of each of these indicators. That is, as you can notice here, these are nothing but the 4 indicators: environment, economical, technological, as well as social, etc. And then we try to weigh, and then can you notice here, it is 88.93. That means when I try to say 88.93, I mean to say this particular building which was selected is coming under 4-star rating. So in order to make it actually more comprehensive, we try to develop a commercial application of this using the graphic user interface. And as you can notice that there is a QR code which is in this. We have now trying to patent this particular thing. And so then this particular QR code can be useful to, can you notice here, these are the criteria, and can you notice here, these are nothing but the attributes. So it is completely combining all of them, and this will give me directly when I try to put this QR code, on a particular building, for example, I can simply read it and then get it once I get this particular score. The score is this particular thing. So that is what is the building assessment tool which we try to develop. And this can really have a good commercial application. Probably the municipal authorities can use it, do a household survey. And then what I mean to say here is, at this point in time, that if your house number is something like 1-4-22, you should have something like 1-4-22 by 30, which means that 30 is nothing but your sustainable building performance score of that particular building. And if the score periodically for that particular value is 30 is on a scale of 100, is definitely going to be a very low value. And you can actually check ways and means of probably implementing those alternatives from any point of view. For example, a septic tank, or for example, a solar water heater, or for example, type of material which they are trying to use. So you can try to make a combination of that so that you can try to get a good score. Now, to come to an end, I just want to say that will we be lucky to see these days? As you can notice, if because of this global pandemic, the Earth overshoot day is fortunately coming to 22nd August, because there is a lull in the progress of construction because of this novel pandemic coronavirus. But the earlier it was July 29th, and then now it has come to August 22nd. In fact, it's good that we can leave our resources which we are trying to build up to August 22nd. That means, in fact, this particular value, in fact, as we are really having good amount of resource this year. Earlier, the last year it was complete by July 29th. This time we are having August 22nd, which means it's a good news. But this good news is because of the lull in the construction and the use and the reduction in the mobility of the people, etc. And that's how the Earth Overshoot Day has actually come to 22nd August. But what I mean to say here is this sustainability which we are trying to talk about should not come by disaster like what we have got because of the novel coronavirus. This should come as a design. That is what should be the aim of the budding engineers or young scientists as well as the young faculty, etc. And I'm just trying to check, can we really try to get a day where we can at least survive by reducing the carbon dioxide emission by 30%? Can I see a day where by 2030, this particular Earth Overshoot Day is further going to go up to September 16, 27? Otherwise, if you continue to do the business as usual, the Earth Overshoot Day in 2030 will, I'm afraid, be June 28th, which means definitely by middle of the year only we are consuming all our resources. So this is what is my point which I want to say. And finally, to close, I'll also try to bring out some of the points which are way forward for your budding engineers, scientists, as well as your the faculty members who are working in the area of materials as well as sustainability. I would try to bring about some points here. I think at the end of this, I just want to say that we have tried to focus on the performance part of the different materials. We have tried to also focus on how to assess the materials by using a tool which we have developed that is called a sustainable building assessment tool. But however, I think this is not the end because that particular tool is developed for the residential buildings. So it's also important to develop such a robust, sustainable assessment tool, not only for the residential buildings, but also for infrastructure, including the spaces like commercial spaces, industrial spaces, etc. And at the same time, I try to talk about the performance aspect. I said, we try to understand the different types of materials, and then don't just concentrate on fly ash, silica fumes, GGBS, risers cash, metakaolin. There are things like very good materials like LC3, for example, limestone, cast and clay type of cements, which you can try to think about. And then you can think about B-like cements. You can think about alumina-rich type of cements. As I said, you can go to the right side and using a little bit of sulfur. You can think about calcium sulfur aluminate based cements, etc. Probably with an overall idea that you should be in a position to reduce the carbon footprint. At the same time, don't compromise on the strength and don't compromise on the durability. I think it's important that we try to develop something like, if you talk S as, for example, something like S as strength, D as, let us say, durability, and S as sustainability. I think something like SX, TX, SY, SZ type of concrete is important, where X, Y, Z correspond to the subscriptions with respect to strength, durability, and XYZ are nothing but the strength, durability, and sustainability. So gone are the days when we talk about M30 grade of concrete or M40 grade of concrete. It's important to now talk about S30, DX, DY, and DZ type of, SZ type of concrete, where all the three, that is S, D, sustainability, strength, and durability are taken into account. Another thing which I just want to take into our point is we have to not only think about the supplementary cementitious materials as a replacement for cement, though cement is producing a good amount of carbon dioxide because of the large amount of cement we are using. But one should understand that aggregate is also occupying a key role because it's occupying 60 to 65% of the total concrete. So it's important that we have to think about ways and means of replacing the aggregate also, like construction demolition waste, or you can think about ceramic waste, rubber tire waste, etc. Anything like that we can actually think about replacing ceramic powder, marble powder, the different types of robo sand, for example. We have to think about all these things. It's also important that we have to think about service life prediction. There are Life 365, Duracrete, and certain other types of things that are available. You can use a fixed law of diffusion basically to assess what is the chloride-based diffusion, and then you can assess what is the life cycle prediction. And also, it's very important, as I was trying in the initial stages, that the embodied energy calculation is not really available. That's the bad news, and that's a deficit that the budding engineers, like budding scientists, like you people, should also think about can I really calculate the embodied energy? If I want to use fly ash, what is the embodied energy of a fly ash, silica fume combined type of cement which I'm trying to develop? And also think about the life cycle assessment, because it's not just important to only think about the material which is coming onto the site, but it should be thought from the pre-construction, during construction, post-construction, ways and means of recycling. Think about circular economy right from cradle to grave. I think this is what is a simple, I should say, a triangular love story between strength, durability, as well as sustainability. Thank you very much. Stay home, stay safe, and should you have any questions, please. And
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks, Honorable. We have at the end line 10 of from the base of the sustainable. Hello, sir. Do you hear me? Hello.
yeah, if you have any questions, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, it's very interesting from the compositions of the cement from the earth crust and oxidized compositions with the hydraulic minerals. And it's very from the base how to derive from the sustainable materials. So it's very nice to hear. And at the end, we are talking about the stars of that building. That is, what are the stars? Normally, we know that only the stars given for the electronic goods. But now it comes for buildings also based on the sustainability. It's a new news and new thing for us also, sir. And now I am requesting all the people who can interact with you directly to sir to raise the questions. And I will start with my question, sir. First question, sir. The interfacial zones with the old concrete. When I using that same aggregate. With that new concrete, that is a 50% partial replacement or 100% partial replacement. So what are the things I have to taken care before adding that old aggregate to the new concrete, sir?
I got your point. I think you're talking about construction demolition waste or the recycled aggregate. In fact, that's a very, very, very important thing, because when I'm trying to use an old aggregate, the most important thing is there is an old mortar which is going to stick onto the aggregate. So it's very important to assess what is the percentage of old mortar which is clinging onto the surface of these aggregates. That's one very important thing. So that means you have to calculate the amount of old mortar which is going to stick onto the aggregate, because this is going to create a weak concrete when you are trying to use directly in this particular thing. So normally, when you try to go for jaw crusher, for example, most of this mortar, that's called as adhered mortar. Now, this adhered mortar will normally be going out, but I think if it is still existing to the order of 28 to 33% from the literature, I don't think it's really having a good impact. You can still try to go for 50% of the replacement of this recycled aggregate in the natural aggregate in the concrete. The second point is the amount of water absorption. That's a very important point. The water absorption is normally 8 to 10% in case of recycled aggregate, as compared to just 0.5% in case of your normal aggregate. So it is very important that when you try to go for mixed design as per IS 10262, for example, you try to soak this aggregate for something like 1 hour and bring it to the saturated surface dry condition before it is used in concrete. Or the other thing is, whatever is the water absorption which is there for this particular concrete, you can try to compensate that particular water, that amount of water absorption by adding a additional amount of water. That is the second thing. The other things are I'm also seeing that if you are talking about the reclaimed asphalt pavement, for example, rather than the construction demolition waste, I think this reclaimed asphalt pavement, once again, if 28 to 30% is clinging onto the aggregate, I think the good news is also there that this is going to add something like a hydrophobic type of material, which will not really allow the inside water to go away. So that means really it's having a good play on the workability point of view also. So this is what are the important things which you have to see. So if you want to just to put in one line, I will say that the water absorption, specific gravity, and the adhered mortar, these are the most important thing. Of course, the recycled aggregate is going to be slightly rough. It's actually going to be slightly more friction. The impact resistance is going to be less, and the abrasion is also going to be high. So which means, but I think the most important thing is the adhered mortar, which is clinging, and the water absorption.
Okay, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And the first question, Basavaraj Aki, dear sir, can you elaborate on energy cycle while we use recycled aggregate as a recycling itself? Involve energy and how
that's a very good question. Yeah, I got your point. I think that's a very good question. I think when we try to use the recycled aggregate, that is called as circular economy, which I was talking about as a life cycle assessment. Unfortunately, when you are trying to use the recycled aggregate, though the Ministry of Environment, Forest, as well as Pollution Control Board say that out of 100% of aggregate, 20% of recycled aggregate to be used, as I said, the implementation part is actually less. And that's because of the lack of knowledge. So just like at one point of time, people were afraid to use fly ash. You know that. That's a supplementary cementitious material where people were afraid to use fly ash, though it's having a very good performance point of view to some extent, up to 30% probably try to use. But when we try to convince that Lord Shiva also used fly ash, when God is using fly ash, why don't you people use such sort of a thing? When we try to, put forth, then people started. In the sense that a lot of research has actually gone into use of fly ash. Similarly, probably the embodied energy calculation, if it can be done for the recycled aggregate right from the pre-construction to during construction to construction phase, vis-a-vis the all the 6 R's which I am talking about, probably it can be a good idea. But the embodied energy calculation, as far as the Indian context is concerned, is very less, and that is the reason why I try to project it as a gray area of research. So I think somebody can work. Basically, if I'm trying to use a jaw pressure, when I'm trying to use the jaw pressure, how much time I'm using, how much amount of fossil fuel I'm expending, how much amount of time, how much amount of electricity consumption. From these things, I think I can try to work out the energy and then transport, for example, and then how much amount of replacement you are using for aggregate. There you can get something. How much amount, what is the grade of quantity I'm trying to use, and what is the amount of aggregate I'm once again trying to replace. By working out all these things, you can try to get the energy calculation. I think that can be done. That should be done by somebody. People are doing it, in fact.
Yes, sir. Sir, now Sunil Kute, sir, you can unmute and you can raise your question.
Yeah. Fresh afternoon, sir. It was really a very wonderful and very different, insightful lecture. I congratulate you for your wonderful presentation, the lecture, and that is really a good value addition also. I have one question, that will the geopolymer concrete be a comparatively good alternative to conventional concrete?
Obviously,
in the
sir.
Sustainability, and if it is so, then what will be probable limitations of this concrete?
Yeah.
Geopolymer
That's a very good question, sir. In fact, I told you that we try to make some research. We try to do some research on 5 different materials. That is ordinary Portland cement, Portland slag cement, Portland pozzolana cement, composite cement, and geopolymer type. So when we try to do this, actually from the qualitative as well as quantitative point of view, we got an alternative among which the best alternative has come to the geopolymer concrete. This is from both points of view. One is from the durability point of view, not so much, but from the strength point of view, early gain in strength is one thing which was actually advantageous. But the point is, why I'm not really trying to emphasize that though geopolymer concrete is definitely a best alternative, is that there is several research which has to still go into geopolymer concrete from the durability point of view. We are very happy that the strength gain is very high at early ages. But this sort of strength gain at early ages, which is actually triggering the very high heat burst, is it really creating will it create some related issues vis-a-vis the AFT, AFM phases which are likely to form, and the alkalis of different molarity which we are trying to use, is once again a question. But as of now, with the research which is available at this point in time, not so much focusing on the durability, just from the sustainability point of view, I think geopolymer concrete can be a good alternative, because the higher amount of fly ash is available, which is coming from the coal-fired thermal power stations. It is good, but it would have been more good if good amount of slag is available, because slag is available in less amount. As I said, only 8% is available. I think if alternative to the slag, if people can work on geopolymer with fly ash and rice husk ash, or geopolymer and metakaolin, and geopolymer with slag plus rice husk ash or something like that, I think if some more durability studies are done, I can tell it more confident. But as of now, with the available material, definitely geopolymer stands first.
For the normal temperature, will this temperature cooling aspect of the geopolymer concrete be always sufficient for the room temperature?
Yeah, that's what is the problem, sir. Geopolymer concrete basically requires high heat in the initial stages, and that's why it is more suitable for what you call oven curing. But these days, because of the use of slag, that's what I was trying to tell you. In fact, the slag which is having a calcium oxide, and then the alumina which is present in the other forms which we are trying to use, like the what do you call the other materials which you are trying to use, sodium silicate, for example, or calcium silicate, for example, which you are trying to use, the modifying the molarity, etc. Probably the calcium oxide can come in contact with the silicate, and then it can produce this tricalcium silicate, which can trigger the polymerization process of the geopolymer also. That can be a good point, in fact. But as of now, with the use of slag and fly ash combinations, even without oven curing also, I think we are going to get a good grade of concrete.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And Sahil, you can unmute yourself and you can raise the question.
Yes, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir, audible.
Yes, as we talked about the sustainability of the building material, so can we use that non-destructive testing of these concrete or what we say, these types of material-based concrete members, or is it still in R&D process?
No. Sustainable material which I am talking about is a different aspect. Any material can be tested by using non-destructive evaluation. There are several non-destructive tests which are available. The sustainability of material and the type of evaluation, they are not combined at all. They are not related at all. Because sustainability is only concentrating upon the technology, environment, social as well as economical point of view, developing a material which is having all these things. So which is an ordinary material which you talk. For example, if you talk about geopolymer material or a Portland slag cement type based material, concrete, for example, these are sustainable materials only. So the testing and the sustainability, they are not. You can still test.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Any other question from participants?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Any other?
Yeah, I think if there are no questions, I think
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
you can still leave by email ID, and if there are people who want to send me a question, they can send, and I can also try to answer. So I think I once again thank the management, the principal, head of the department, as well as Dr. Rajesh for giving me this opportunity to interact with you guys. And I would like to say that whatever I try to talk about is just a beginning. It's a beginning. I try to just tickle some research interest in you. And, we have to take forth, and then we need to really work together. We need to really work a lot to take this particular concept of sustainability more and more to a higher level. So remember, it's a beginning. You really have to, I try to give tickle some research interest in you. So please take it further. Okay. So thank you so much once again.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you once again for accepting our invitations and give the keynote speakers. Thank you, sir. Thanks once again. And on behalf of the management and the department also, I am saying that my sincere gratitude to you, sir, for accepting our invitation. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Can I log off now?
Yes, sir. You can log out, sir. Thank you,
so
sir.
much. Yeah.
And dear participants, and now time is somewhat 11:50. Already our second keynote speaker, Dr. Sunita Madam, is on wait. So better we can have a 10 minutes break, and then we can assemble at 12 o'clock. Thank you, Nanda.